So, what is the topic?
Should I teach?
Should I teach? So, I talk about that quite often in different ways without even mentioning that question. Before we start reaching out towards others to instruct them or give them support or help based on our own ideas, opinions, evaluations, analysis of others, what's happening, first, it's a good idea to get to know yourself, to get to know your own negativities, your own difficulties, the degree to which you buy into your thought process. I often say, and I'm saying now, don't believe your thoughts. Don't disbelieve your thoughts. Don't do anything with them. The degree to which you push your thoughts away, I don't want that, or fluff your thoughts up, I really think that's true. That should happen. That person is this way or that way. Do you have any Tums? I have acid reflux, and sometimes it catches me by surprise. Excuse me. Yeah. So you can watch me chew this. So good. It's almost like Ready Whip. You've all heard of the joy of Ready Whip? If you don't watch TV, you wouldn't see that commercial. Where was I? What was the last thing you wrote down? Ready
Your
Whip.
own negativities.
Ah, good idea. So how do you do that? You're not going to see, if you're moving slightly, if you're trying to see how to work with your mind and you're moving this much, it takes a long time to see this. It took me decades. But if you're making any movement at all, I'm not saying you can't breathe, but the more movement that is happening, the more we get clouded, because the relationship, you want to call it that, between body and mind is not actually a relationship. They're actually not separate. Isn't that great? I think it is. This means that when you sit down, hold very still, you are the Buddha. You're not separate from the realization that occurred 2,500 years ago with the historical person we call Shakyamuni or Gautama, the Buddha, the enlightened one, the charioteer. So when you're in a relationship with someone, talking to someone, might be someone who's a meditator, might be one of your Dharma brothers or sisters, might be someone who knows nothing about meditation. I say less is better. Less is better. Try to put your senses, your thought process, your everything on receive, especially the mind. Receive what is happening with this person. And when you do that, don't evaluate it as it comes into your mind stream. No comment. This is difficult because ego mind, the self-centered mind, the assumption that there is somebody called you, there really isn't. That's an assumption. That's a belief. You believe because there is pain, because there is joy, because there is boredom. You believe that there's someone having that. You believe there's someone here laughing. He came back. So what am I trying to point out? I'm going to ask myself that question so that I can respond to it. I'm trying to say that whatever is arising in someone else's situation and in your mind, don't accept it, don't reject it, don't look away. This is very difficult to do. And without sitting down on a cushion facing the wall, just holding very, very still, holding everything as still as you can without being rigid, so that the awareness, let me say it this way, without doing that, the awareness will be, the energy of awareness seems to be sucked up into the rotating quality of the way the mind works. I like it, I don't like it, it's good, it's bad, it should be, it shouldn't be. Passion, aggression, and ignorance. Passion pulling, aggression pushing, and ignorance closing off, shutting down, distracting yourselves. Those are the three. Contemplate those. See the way those are operating in your mind all the time. And here's the other assumption that I'm going to help you with, because I think you might have it already. You might think you have to get rid of that. You don't have to get rid of anything. You just have to see what it is. You have to just be clear on what it is. And that may happen in layers or levels. There's all kinds of things in the teachings about this, the 9 stages of shamatha or a tranquility practice. It's on and on and on. People are just full of themselves. They're teachers trying to teach, trying to support, trying to give you some help, trying to give you a leg up, give you some crutches, give you some training wheels. You may or may not need those, but you're the one who should decide that. Even as a Dharma teacher, I'm very, very tentative about telling anybody to do anything other than meditate. And even when I tell them that, I know that they're going to go and do what they think meditation is. That's kind of risky on my part, isn't it? Shouldn't I be telling them ahead of time? By the way, don't do it wrong. When I say wrong, it's actually not wrong, because you may have to do a meditation or awareness practice in such a way that from the point of view of the awakened one, or someone who is clear, someone without any self-centeredness, or seeing the self-centeredness as unreal, not true, you may appear to be going in circles. But the teaching person will see that and not interrupt you. This is called a respect. You respect people's confusion. Don't interrupt other people's mind stream just because you can. Because quite often when we do this, if you look at your original intention, it's about wanting to forget about your own issues and problems. You want to, well, it feels a little better to go and help somebody else. And then the excuse of ego is to say, well, I'm just trying to be helpful. Well, this is horse shit. Well, maybe that's too strong of a word. What other kind of shit is there? So what it is, it's just not true to reach. I would say, mind your own business. Don't meddle with other people's minds. Unless they're actually asking you, and then be really sure that's what they want. If they're saying, you seem to be doing okay, can you help me? What would you say that I should do? And then you could say, you could investigate, ask a few questions. Well, what have you been doing? They say, well, I've been taking drugs, or I've been doing this, or I've been shooting pool. I've been hiking, I've been camping. I can't seem to get away from this negativity or whatever it may be. You might find that you might find a situation where it's kind of the next thing to say when they say to you, well, what do you do? Say, well, if you are meditating, say, well, I practice meditation. And if they say, well, can you teach me to do that? Well, sure, you have permission. And probably the best thing for most people to teach them is to teach them to follow their breath. Because it's very difficult to do shikantaza without somebody telling you, without some access to someone who knows about that. Or shikantaza, or just precisely this. It's an advanced teaching, and it's probably the simplest. So when they say don't teach, unless you have to, which I often say, especially to say that to people who are close to me, who are close students, who actually are being trained to teach. I'm not saying you shouldn't say, well, first hold your hands like this, or hold still, I'm not saying not to teach in that way, but don't presume to explain the nature of reality to someone. You been doing that, Bailey? I said that because Bailey is the only one that smiled. Well, she's the only one I saw smiling. When it comes to children, young children, quite often we as adults, especially the first year or two that you start meditating, if you do this actively, like every day, or inactively, however you want to look at it, every day you sit down and enact. Hold still, watch what moves. Train your mind. You have to look at your insanity before you can be sane. I'm sorry to tell you that. That's not only good news, it's also bad news because it's difficult. It's difficult to continually, day after day, to look at your mind roiling around doing this and with all kinds of spikes and prickers and rough areas. And I don't need to say anything more about it. But in order to awaken, you have to see the difficulty. So you may have to spend some time with that. Quite often, meditation instructors are trying to get you to feel better. I have no interest in getting you to feel better. You've noticed that, huh? I'm not saying I don't care about how bad you feel. Of course I do. I have sympathy, and it hurts me to be around someone who's having difficulty, even if they don't tell me about it. But I also have respect for the person's Buddha nature, and I know that they can awaken, but they only need a certain amount of help from me. Everyone needs a little bit different kind of help. So I know, just like the Buddha did, as I've often said, the Buddha did not awaken to some kind of a wonderful, blissful state. I mean, even though that's talked about sometimes. But first he had to go through a very difficult passage, very difficult trajectory through not only his own difficult karma, but through everyone else's that was close to him, around him. He had to see the nature of being a human being, of being a living being. And what was that? Was the first word. The first noble truth was life is suffering. And quite often those people who don't know anything about awareness practice and operate totally out of their intellect and their mind, they immediately jump right in and say, well, Buddhism is nihilistic or pessimistic. And you'll notice that Buddhists don't even defend that. It's not particularly nihilistic, nor is it, what's the other one? No, close. Eternalism. Nihilism. It's not going to work. Eternalism. It's wonderful. Where was I?
Life is suffering.
I know. It is. Life sucks. Yeah. How does that go? That you probably heard it. Life sucks and then you die. Yes, sir. Jay?
People often come to me for teaching about disability space,
Yes.
advocacy, and activism.
Yes.
But what they're really asking for are opinions.
Yeah.
How do we negotiate people really wanting opinions?
Yes. It's different with everyone. And so the very best thing you can do is wait and see who you're talking to, because everyone is different, to see what they're actually asking you. Because everyone that asks you the same thing, like the question you just related there, has a different kind of motivation under it. And you're not going to be able to see that unless you see your own motivations for pushing, pulling, looking away. So I would say spend some time. You could actually ask them a few questions without particularly interrogating them. You know, like, well, how's this? How do you see it yourself? What does it look like to you? Put it back in their area so they can respond. And then they'll come forward. Anytime you ask someone to paraphrase themselves, you know, if someone asks me a question, sometime I'll say, paraphrase that. I've been doing this for years, and it's so helpful in two ways. One, I might have forgot what they said. That's helpful. And the other thing is when they say it a different way, then I realize the way in which they're thinking about it, and they're more clear on what they're actually asking too. It's always mutual. If it's not mutual, then it's one. And if it's one, then there's two. And if it's two, it's duality. We're right back to confusion, the endless wheel of life and death, life and death. You can't jump off from something that's not real. You have to see that it's not real, and you are, grandfathered in, you're grandmothered in. It's already the case. You already are not separate from the Buddha. I rarely ask people to believe anything I say or disbelieve it. But if you're going to believe anything, believe what I just said. What did I just say?
Don't believe it.
Yeah, that's part of it. Huh? What? Yeah, don't you think I know that? It's not separate. It's not separate. The confusion's not separate. The awakening's not separate. You're fundamentally free already. It's just that we use suffering or pain or difficulty as some kind of a proof or evidence that something's wrong. If you do that, then you don't understand the nature of nerve endings. All the 6 sense fields have nerve endings. If you pat them and pet them, they're quite comfortable and nice and sweet. And if you run over them with a bulldozer, not so good. Same nerve ending. Same nerving, just a heavy disturbance. We have to be sensitive so we can function as an apparently separate entity in a situation that is not separate. So do your job. What is your job? Train your mind. Find out who you are so you know that you're just a little tiny taste bud somewhere in the midst of the vastness. You scratching your ear, or you asking a question? Be careful making any emotions because I'm watching you. So the other thing I wanted to say is when talking to children about meditation, which quite often I think I started to say, we get kind of excited about meditation. We've been doing it a year or two, and we meet children. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if children meditated? So we've started to make a little bit of progress on the path. It can be said that way a little bit. And to see, we've let go of a little bit of our negativity. We've started to get a little bit more understanding of what it's like to just observe, just to be present. We're starting to do that, and then we see a child with what is it, ADHD, one of those initials, and we want to maybe help them, or maybe they don't have that. Maybe we just feel like we need to teach them to meditate. The best thing you can do for any child is, as far as meditation, is meditate yourself. You meditate. You meditate. And if there's any kind of resonance happening there that is under the carpeting, which all resonance is, they're going to pick that up. They'll probably pick it up quicker than anybody because children are incredibly aware. They just don't have a developed intellect. When that's way back when there's hardly intellect at all, they're practically mind readers. They're also impractically mind readers. I know, what's the difference? Back there isn't much. So what you would do is you would meditate, and then he or she might say, "What are you doing?" Instead of the adult would say, "I see you're meditating." Whereas the child might say, What are you doing? And then you would just say very simply, "I'm meditating." Use the word. "Why are you doing that?" You might say, and this would be your own, it wouldn't be copying me. You would say, "I'm trying to see how I deceive myself." That's going to make sense to them. You haven't even mentioned the Buddha yet. And you might never mention the Buddha unless it comes up. So always relate to whatever's arising in front of you. And you can't do that if you keep shutting down on it with your ideas, your opinions, your projections. I like it, I don't like it, it's good, it's bad. It's just a child. There's no way that a person this tall is just a child. No, there's no way. It's just a child. They're a child, they're very young, but not just a child. You can't count, there's no way to count the number of centuries that spirit has been around. There's no way to know, including your own. Just to use the relative concept of time. Fundamentally, even that's hyperbole. What? Hyperbole. So with a child, you would relate to them where they're at. One child, and I had several of them, might be really, really interested. My oldest son, Mason, who's in Nepal right now, and he's a monk, was extremely interested. It was just way, 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 way too interested for a 10-year-old. He would meditate all day long just because Dad's meditating all day long, so then he would come and meditate. And he would sit on his cushion and fall off from it, and then he would get back, and he would fall off this way, and then he would get back. He was bored. So that's why he would sit and sit and sit, and then he was deliberately falling off as entertainment. It's quite funny, quite irritating to the rest of the Sangha. But I just didn't know what to do with it, so I didn't do much. Whereas other of my children have tried it, but they don't have any interest in that. So it's a very, very, very specific kind of thing that some people are going to resonate with or connect with because of the invisible causes and conditions that arise as any given living being. Some people are going to have that kind of chemistry already. You kind of need to have some of that chemistry for you even walk in this room. And even then, when you come in with a armload of causes, conditions, presumptions, ideas, beliefs, and so on. I would say you don't have to get rid of those. Just be aware that you're operating out of beliefs. The main one, the basic mistaken identity is that there's a self. That you are someone solid. I'm not saying there isn't something happening, of course, but it's not threatened. Isn't that nice? It's not threatened. There's no way you can threaten it. Even killing this can't threaten who you are. So meeting people where they're at will give you some time. Say you meet someone who's having difficulty and they're saying, well, teach me, tell me about it. And so I would say, relatively, sure, you could teach someone how to meditate. And they might even say, well, my mind's really wild and crazy and keeps going this way. And say, well, why don't you follow your breath for a while? You can work with them where they're at, but not lock down on it and there are people who teach, there are way more people who teach this way than teach otherwise, trying to stay on the breath. Please don't do that. And I can say that from experience in that I was taught that way. I did it myself for decades. Don't do it. Just watch what moves. Whatever moves is free game. But if you try to lock down and create a meditator, which is what is often encouraged, especially in some of the Tibetan teachings of Shamatha Vipassana, Laktung and Shine, or Shine and Laktung, I should say. They're not incorrect. I'm not saying, oh, don't do that, that's wrong. But I'm saying if you're listening to me, then listen to what I'm saying. Sit down, hold still, watch what moves. Train your mind. If you're in this room, you're meant to see this. You don't have to start by counting your breaths. Unless you do. I mean, if things get really difficult with you because you're going through a particular passage, Mars is squaring your natal Saturn or something, or you didn't drink enough water that week. Causes and conditions. I mean, you can't even count. You can't even begin to count. You can't even count the first 1% of them because they're everywhere and they're invisible. So maybe you might need to use some kind of stabilization. Maybe you need to get up every 10 minutes and go get a drink of water or do some walking meditation. But it should be your practice, not following somebody else's orders, including mine. So if you're sitting, students that I have, if they say, well, I'm not sitting. I haven't sat for a couple weeks. All right. And then I wait, see how they're working with that. And then they may say, well, I don't know what I do. I can't do this. I just can't get to the cushion. I can't. And then someone else might say, I'm sitting 3 hours a day. That's good. So I'm not saying I don't see the difference between those two situations. I'm just saying the difference is not functioning in the way that you might think it is. Each one of these people are doing exactly what they need to do. There's nothing to correct. If we think there's something to correct, then we're right back to relative truth. We're right back to cause and effect, and being caught up in the 8 worldly dharmas, which 8 worldly dharmas go something like this. Gain and loss, success and failure, life and death. Any polarity you see where you think one is good and the other is bad, that's the 8 worldly dharmas. From the transcendent point of view, from the point of view of the Buddha's dharma, everything is dependently arisen. There is no opposition. That's an illusion based on grasping at a self, grasping at an other. Me and them guys. My friend, my enemy, someone that I don't care about. You can see it in your own mind. Watch it in your own mind. It's very interesting. If you begin to watch that, probably not going to be particularly boring. The boredom that arises on the cushion, if you do a lot of it, the downside is boring. But the upside is it's a sign that you're actually giving up on your addiction to entertainment. I'm not talking about binge watching Game of Thrones. I'm talking about that subjective kind of entertainment where we keep entertaining ourselves with just bullshit stories about this and about that. I like it. I don't. They shouldn't have said that. And they should look what they're doing now. If they don't do that, why do they keep? Why? Why questions are what? Circular. Why is it? Why am I feeling? Why is it? Do I need a nap? When I'm saying, I don't mean to be sarcastic or disrespectful to anyone's confusion and just be flippant about it. I'm just saying, please, bring your mind down to whatever is moving. And the thought patterns that are moving, don't accept them, don't reject them, don't look away. Those are basic teaching of Buddhism that cause us to go in circles around an apparent self and around an apparent other, friend and enemy, and create the illusion of that. And of course, it's being reinforced by our culture, says that. Our society is, all of our associates and friends and coworkers. If you get into any conversation with anybody about anything, these days, especially politics, I mean, the sparks just start flying everywhere. About they shouldn't. We should do something about this. Some people actually stop meditating altogether and just start working in political situation. Again, not wrong, not something to correct. You could watch that. You could see how that person functions in that way, but it's not something to correct. Questions would be good if you have some. Yes?
What is it about our slight movements that cloud our ability to see the negativity?
I think that the slight movement is tied into a kind of, and this word doesn't fit exactly, it's kind of a laziness there's a natural, when you hold very still and decide you're staying this way unless you absolutely have to move, that's the way to approach it. And if you have to move, it's like I said when I give instruction, sit down, look at the wall, and stay there as long as you can. Stay there till the gong rings. But if you have to get up and go to the restroom, or if you have to stretch your legs, then trust that. In other words, really come back into your own body-mind context or situation yourself. So it's not some outside authority. It's another way of saying, get your own authority. But first you have to start by seeing how attached you are to other people's opinions of you. If you're concerned about what somebody else is thinking, then that's why we get sucked into somebody else's authority, and we find out, and we have whole 18-year-olds because of the situation marching off to war. If people could really see clearly, there wouldn't be any war. You can't have a war unless you have people that want to fight, and you can't have people that want to fight unless they're convinced, this is what they should do. Again, nothing to correct. It's a misunderstanding to think, well, they're wrong and we need to stop them. No, you need to respect everyone. Everyone is moving at their own pace, their own rate, in terms of their awareness, in terms of their karma. And what I'm saying to you, a very simple situation, I'm saying meditate, and when you do, hold still. And you're asking me, what is it about this or this, or this, that is disruptive. Is that what you're asking me? It's because we would like to see what's happening in the mind, and we can't find the mind, so we find the one thing, you could say one thing, that we can control, and that's the body. Hold the body very, very still, and what is moving, still moving, of its own, you could say volition, or cause and effect situation, it gets more and more clear. You can't do it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It has to be done for long periods of time, it seems. And that's another way of looking at it, to say, why does it have to be done? Why can't we just see that right away? It's because we've been spending centuries, not only the culture, but individual spirit, lifetime after lifetime. That's how it looks. I don't know if there's any lifetimes. There's probably just this one. The rest of it's an illusion. I don't mind. I don't feel offended if someone comes and says, aha, we proved it. And it won't be long and that'll be disproved. So the movement is, in itself, that's not so much, but to have the mind that is not, so it's not so much the movement, but watch, if I have a casual movement where I'm not thinking, quite often somebody can scratch their shoulder, something like this, and you could say a minute later, what did you just do? They won't remember because they're on autopilot. So all those are happening automatically. When that happens with the body automatically, it starts to happen in the mind automatically. We actually cover up and deceive ourselves kind of automatically. So all we're saying is we're kind of maybe reversing that. We're slowing way down, and we're gonna look at that and examine that more closely without accepting it, rejecting it, or looking away. So it's a little bit more, you could say, scientific, I guess, objective maybe. Sheldon.
What does the mind look like that isn't addicted to anything?
You can't see it. It's like space. We assume, well, look at what we assume. We assume that, well, let's see, here's the mind. Like different cultures who do it this different ways. Some people, when they express, they use the personal pronoun I, they say, well, as for me, they'll point towards their heart. Someone else might, in Japan, they say, well, as for me, they point to their nose. Not wrong, it's just the whole idea of the assumption about someone being here. As for me. Whereas the Buddha would point to the sky and say, as for me. No, he wouldn't do that. He'd get his finger all blue. All that wet paint up there. Big blue pancake, Trungpa Rinpoche used to say. Used to refer to the sky as a big blue pancake. Because that which is spacious as you proceed along the path begins to solidify, and that which seems like a thing begins to get holes in it. Again, not two. They're not separate. They're only seen as separate. That's why we need to divide things up in order to see them. But then the ultimate situation is it's not two different things. The five skandhas are just a way of breaking down what the consciousness does that attaches to a self: form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness. Yes?
So is that why we have to divide up reality and absolute and relative?
Why?
Well, you said we have to separate to see.
Yes,
that it's
that's
not
correct.
separate.
It's not separate, but in order to see it, to be able to examine it, to bring the consciousness into it, we have to do it through a concept. Just like you can't make a lemon meringue pie without a recipe. Well, you probably could. So and that's not that example doesn't go the whole direction. It's just part of it, because even that is too relative to really say it. It's difficult to put in words. Poets try to do this all the time. Artists see, understand, have an intuition of what this is, and try to say it through their art. The sage, or the enlightened being, if you want to use that fancy word, sees, and then they may or may not teach. They may teach, and they may just run a coin laundry in Brooklyn.
Speaking of New York, a couple questions from Sandra.
Sandru.
His first one is, I can get the nerve endings for the usual 5 senses. What's the nerve ending for the mind?
That's the most painful one. That's the one that's most sensitive because it doesn't have a location in time and space. So the first 5, that's why they're called sense fields, the first 5, but quite often we refer to the 6th consciousness, or 6th, 7th, and 8th as being some other kind of dimension or something, but they're just receivers. The sense of touch is a receiver. Sometimes it feels nice, and sometimes it's painful. And it happens on so many different levels. It's like one of the ways that I would use for the mind is, let's take the sense of seeing. If you look at a painting by Monet, it's very beautiful. It represents something that's very beautiful. What was it he painted?
Water lilies.
Yeah, water lilies. And then if you look at a painting by Jackson Pollock, or a painting by any one of the New York School painters, Franz Klein, Robert Motherwell, and so on, these artists were looking at a deeper way of expressing what this was. So their situation is showing up. So when we look at that, instead of seeing what it is visually, instead of using the visual consciousness, the unexamined mind, the ego mind, the self-centered narcissistic mind, can't handle not knowing, because it feels left out. It feels disregarded. So it joins in with its opinions and ideas, and with things. The simplistic one to say, well, my kid could paint that. Well, your kid couldn't paint that. And so the mind is coexistent, I guess, but there must be a better word, with all of the senses. The mind, the sense of smell is not joined necessarily by the sense of seeing. The sense of touch is not joined necessarily by the sense of hearing, but a little bit. But there isn't any one of the 5 senses that isn't joined up with the 6th consciousness, or the actual word processor, the one that actually looks at what you're smelling, who's smelling it, is it a good smell, is it a bad smell, what should I do about it, who caused this evil smell? We need to take them out. The time to end.
And just one quick follow-up from Sandra, and then
Okay.
yes, we need to dedicate the merit. He asks, is mind expressed in this moment now through all the skandhas, not just living inside my skull or brain?
Yeah. It's called, my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, called it centerless fringe. Which is what? It's like centerless fringe? It's like, why even refer to a fringe if there's no center? And he probably would say, exactly. Or, I don't know. Nice socks. Welcome. Are we supposed to leave?
Daily Dharma gatherings in 10 minutes.
Who's he? You said David Dharma Gathering? Okay, enough silliness. Thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of the blue chant books. Again, reminding everybody about our donation boxes in the hallway, as well as the ability to donate online through PayPal. We also have a white square card that Bailey can take your money from.
Oops.
Okay.
I'm still hooked.
And please, again, if you can attend this afternoon, you're welcome to join us.
This penetrating to all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi shi wu shi song gu sa mo ko sa directions, the three worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who's unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.